So for the sake of time, as people are still trickling in, we're going to get started. So again, I'm Marion McKenzie.
Hi, I'm Dustin Schroeder.
And we're going to start session 9, which is New Tech and Fair Science. Our first speaker is Ben Hills, and he'll be talking to us about Quantarctica. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. We'll try this again. Hopefully you can see my slides this time. This is a project that it really is run by Kenny and Anders, but I, amongst several others who I will show, have been helping out a bit doing some of the content editing, and Kenny wasn't able to make it here, so he was hoping that I could present, so I'm happy to share on his behalf. Some of you will know about this resource. It's been ongoing for a little over a decade. I think version 1 was in 2012, something like that. And every year it gets a little bit bigger and a little bit more data. So if you have a new data set that you think should be included, I think it's probably a little late for version 4, but eventually there will surely be a version 5 as well. So yeah, Kenny and Anders are running the show here, and they're kind of a well-balanced team, where Kenny kind of does a lot of the science oversight, thinking about what data sets should be included and talking to the different theme editors, and Anders is mainly doing the cartography, thinking about how things should look in a way that is well-suited for lots of different data types and data sets. They're at the Norwegian Polar Institute. And at MPI, they also have support from quite a few other folks. In particular, I want to give a shout out to Ani on the bottom left there, he's a grad student and kind of on the side of all of the research that he's doing for grad school for his dissertation project. He's doing a lot of the kind of coordination and curation of these data sets. I've been working with him a lot. So then, I think this project mainly started when Kenny was thinking about how to compile glaciological data sets, but then as it's grown, it's become much more diverse in terms of the data sets available, and he's outsourced some of that to different folks, different scientists who have expertise in these areas. So these are kind of the high-level different groupings of data sets that we have, and I'll show who is responsible for editing each in the next slide. Yeah, you can see the diversity there. The bottom, the social science is something that's relatively new, and there's not a ton of data sets. I think that the theme editors are struggling to come up with like good data sets to include that have good geolocation. So that's been a challenge for them, but they're looking for more and more data to include. Yeah, so tons of thanks to all of these folks. I'm just one of the glaciology editors, but as you can see, there's people kind of across the board who are supporting this project. Yeah, so for folks that already use this tool, perhaps you'll be familiar with this, but just kind of high level for maybe folks who are less familiar, it's a compilation of all sorts of different data sets. The acronym is QGIS plus Antarctica, so it's maybe tempting to call it Q Antarctica, but Kenny insists that it's called Quantarctica. You don't need to you don't need internet access for it. So the idea is that it's small enough to fit on a flash drive. So what I really like to use it for is taking it to the field. It's very, very useful in field planning if you do a lot of that type of thing. So you can fit it on a relatively small flash drive, bring it around with you wherever you go. And it's useful for that to have all of the kind of really high level important data sets in one spot. Yeah, that's like same kind of thing. High resolution satellite images, topographic maps, lots of different scientific data sets. And more, I think we're including kind of these kind of like social sciences and administrative boundaries that are quite important. This project has inspired a couple other follow-ons. And so maybe if you think about a different area, you could think about doing something similar as well. Q Greenland, Twila Moon, I think, started and has been running. And then this talk, the slides were originally prepared for SCAR, so he included, Kenny included this Patagonian QGIS project as well. So one of the kind of key, or a few of the key tenets, they want to kind of, or we want to lower the entry bar in terms of accessing all of these data products. And in terms of like taking the data and ingesting them into this QGIS project, we don't want to regenerate new data products. We want to keep them kind of as pure as they were in the original DOI, if that makes sense. I don't want to like reinterpolate or do anything to maybe lead to kind of false interpretations. And we want to point users towards, so if you're using Quantarctica, you should be citing the original data citation. So maybe cite Quantarctica, but then also cite, so we don't want to kind of like steal citations from people who are creating the data. Perhaps why the slides are showing up better than mine is because Anders does a lot of thought into what color maps should be used in different ways that are really inclusive of, you know, people with color blindness and yeah, just effective ways to communicate the data. Yeah, just some examples of different visualizations and strategies, some of Anders' beautiful work here. Okay, so the reason that I'm talking to you about this today is because Quantarctica 4 is coming out soon. I think that the idea was originally to have it being kind of pushed out around SCAR, but we're slipping a little bit. There's tons more data than there have been in prior iterations, and so it's just a lot more work from, like, all the theme editors are making tons of suggestions as to what could and should be included, but that makes a lot more work from the folks at MPI, especially for Ani. And sometimes it's hard for him to select which pieces of these complex data sets to include. So it's taking a little bit longer for us to kind of get to a final product, but we're working there. Oh. Yeah, so 406 new data layers suggested by theme editors, 326 data layers screened for Quantarctica 4, and now we've kind of selected down to just under 200 that are actually being incorporated. At this point, I think we're, and that the second bullet there, I think, is maybe left over from SCAR, where we were still perhaps leaning on taking some new data sets, but I think we're like making a cutoff here pretty soon in terms of what could be included. But if there's, quote, best of the best data that was already released, and importantly, it has to have a DOI. So if you want something to be included, it really needs to have a DOI, and that's going to be true in the future too. So if you want to have something included in the next version, make sure that it has a DOI before version 5 starts coming out. And yeah, the cartography is being worked on and developed. So there's lots of new additions across all the different scientific disciplines. I am more focused on the glaciology, so I'll give you a couple updates on just a handful of things that we've included, but there's a lot more as well. Yeah, so for each, I will just show you how they're presented in this interface. So subglacial lakes, we have gotten a lot better at detecting those. The data sets that we have included here are from Landsat and SAR imagery. So there's just a couple citations where they're delineating lake boundaries, and so that might be important for some of you who are thinking surface progress. Surface velocity, there's new velocities, so this has been something that's been, I think, included since version 1 probably, but those get slowly updated, so Jeremy Mougenot's work, and then I think we're also including the ITSLab velocity, so both, I'm pretty sure, as long as there's space, but again, we try to keep the total data volume relatively small so that it can be useful for folks who want to put it on a flash drive, for instance. Just keep kind of moving through. Yeah, these are two-dimensional velocities, so you have the vector field. Basal melt rates from Sushil's work. So for folks, this is kind of at the boundary between, there's a whole another group of theme editors from oceanography, so they have their own data sets, but this is on the glaciology side. Another thing that we were pushing to include was both kind of looking backward and looking forward. So model output for paleo ice sheet as well as future projections. Torsten Albrecht had quite a nice kind of model ensemble study that was really since LGM, and we include some of his output for best fit ice thicknesses. Yeah, so I'll end there and just leave on this video as we're transitioning. Yeah, I didn't make the video, but it just kind of shows the interface and how you interact with it. Thank you.
We have time for a quick question if anybody wants to ask Ben a question.
I'll ask a quick question. Just looking at that movie, it wasn't clear to me where the reference information actually is as someone who helps produce data sets. Is it easy to get to that information?
Yeah, looking within the metadata, so for people who have used UPS, you can right-click on a layer and it's within the metadata, but then also there will be a paper that comes out, so hopefully probably the product will be made available, and then we'll be writing an article, and the citations will be included there as well. So if you're citing Point Artica, then go and look at where the original data citation was from.
Cool, thanks Ben. And up next, we have Ellie Abrams talking to us about persistent polynyas.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here at WAIS Workshop. My name is Ellie Abrams, as Marion said, and I'm a Stanford data science postdoc where I work with Dustin Schroeder and Yao Lai. But today I'm here to talk to you about work that I started as a visiting graduate student at the Colorado School of Mines with Tasha Snow and Matt Siegfried on automatically detecting persistent polynyas in the Thwaites region using geophysically contextualized deep learning. And before I dive into what I mean by that, I'm first going to define what a persistent polynya is. When circumpolar deep water flows onto the continental shelf and reaches the base of the ice sheet, it can melt out water there, and that water can melt and entrain in that water column, and as the meltwater makes the water column more buoyant, it can rise and carve out a basal channel on the subsurface of the ice shelf. If the water is buoyant enough, it can reach the surface at the outlet of that basal channel, and being relatively warm, melt out a hole in the sea ice. We call that hole, right there at the ice shelf front, a persistent polynya because it can recur in that same place over the years. Persistent polynyas can offer a compelling window into these subsurface ice-ocean interactions. And specifically, when we look at this figure right here, this distribution of persistent polynyas on the margins of Antarctica, we see that they tend to occur in West Antarctica. And more specifically, they coincide with areas of the highest rates of warm seawater. For similar reasons, these are the same areas that have high mass loss rates. So you might ask yourself why you haven't heard more about this specific kind of polynya. And to drive this point home, the first multi-decadal characterization of this kind of polynya was only completed this past fall. And this characterization, unsurprisingly, revealed high interannual variability that may vary with some characteristics of the ice shelf. But because we only have this one, it's hard to study that. Additionally, Savage et al. 2023A, who was the same group that completed this multi-decadal characterization, found that these polynyas are detectable from satellite even in polar night. And so now we know that they offer compelling windows into subsurface processes that are visible all year and display this high interannual variability. But as I hinted at earlier, we have this data gap. The time-resolved observational record of persistent polynyas in West Antarctica is missing expert labels. What do I mean by that? We already have the satellite imagery that has observed these polynyas, but we don't know when and where they are. And so we need some way to automate their detection in the huge influx of this imagery that we have. So maybe I could use some of the methods we've seen earlier today, like a UNet, but let me explain to you why that's tricky. Here is a Landsat scene taken on a sunny day in November 2014. So this is close enough to the mid-season that the shadows are minimal. There's also minimal clouds on this day. Do you see the polynyas? You know their formation pathway now, so you know where they should occur. I'll even highlight them in red, and yes, on this projector, I checked, the red is visible. You still might struggle to see them, and that's because they're very small in comparison to the entire scene. There are 3 polynyas contained across these 2 boxes, and typically persistent polynyas are about 1 to 3 kilometer in diameter. And so in an overall Landsat scene like this, they make up of a fraction of a percent of all the pixels in the scene. And so now this actually brings us to our machine learning gap. If we use off-the-shelf methods, these methods assume sufficient representation of our class of interest, these pixels that make up the pollinia, within the training data. However, if we pull these algorithms off the shelf, they might scan a scene and assign no pixels to a pollinia, and they would still be 99.99% statistically accurate. So we see what the challenge is. And this means that rather than using generalized methods, we need to build a method that's specified for a science use case. In other words, a method that is now geophysically contextualized. So let's look back at our scene and see how we can do this with these highlighted polinias. We'll zoom in on one of them right here, and you can clearly see where the pollinia is at that boundary of ice shelf and sea ice. And let's consider how we, as humans, might find the pollinia in these images. So we worked with Ojin Lee, who at the time was a summer intern with us and is now a graduate student at Stanford University with Yao Lai. And Ojin would find a pollinia by specifically looking at that interface of sea ice and ice shelf, which I have labeled here. And this little tile that I picked out, the basal channel is also visible, but it's not always as easily visible in a complex scene, and so we really focus at that interface. If I highlight that interface across this entire image, as I've done here, you can see that the persistent pollinias occur there. And so now I can use this interface to explicitly train my algorithm to look for pollinias at the boundary between sea ice and ice shelf. And that's what I do. I explicitly include this geophysical context directly into the optimization of my machine learning. And so now this is not purely a statistical algorithm, but it also has some scientific information in it. For the sake of time, I'm not going to dive into all the details here, but I'm happy to discuss them. Please come find me if you'd like to. And now we test this in a different location. So in statistics, we call this out of distribution at a different time than our training set. You might notice this is February 2020, and as opposed to our previous training images, which are from Thwaites, this is in Pine Island Bay right here. Additionally, it's on a cloudy day, so the shadows are longer, the day is cloudy. And we find that when we use our geophysical context, we are able to recover 100% of the known pollinias, despite the fact that they make up relatively few pixels within the entire scene. And let's focus in on one of those pollinia so we can see more what happens when we apply this. The red boxes highlight 2 known pollinia that we recovered. We also recover some interesting, much smaller cases than what were labeled of potentially candidate new pollinia that we're investigating now. And we have a few spurious detections, also known as false positives, which we show up there in turquoise. These false positives occur in Pine Island Bay on exposed rock. And that's because in our training set at Thwaites, there was minimal exposed rock, and so our network just didn't learn to ignore that and is now mistaking exposed rock that specifically occurs right near that interface between sea ice and ice shelf as a pollinia. But lucky for us, we can exploit other aspects of the scene to manually remove those in post-processing. To check that our method was necessary, we compared this to off-the-shelf computer vision deep learning benchmarks. And we find that those benchmarks not only don't recover all the known pollinias, but also get stuck on false positives like ice leads. I'm going to kind of skip through this side because it's more of the computer science, but I'm really happy to talk more with you about it. Essentially, the outcome is that explicit geophysical contextualization outperforms purely statistical approaches, even those built specifically for underrepresented data. And so it turns out we need our scientific understanding to inform the computer science that we do on our rare and relatively unknown use cases. We now take this detector and move it across the coastline in the Thwaites region of the Amundsen Sea embayment. Doing so and manually validating, we're able to recover all the previously characterized persistent polynyas from recent studies in this region, locate some new candidate polynyas. This is preliminary. We're still investigating these candidate polynyas. But what's also interesting, another preliminary result, is that we find interannual variability in the polynya occurrence across this region, which you can see here in this video. Right now, we are only testing our detector within the time frame from our training images. So this is prior to austral summer solstice. Savage et al. 2023b showed that some polynyas in this region actually don't fully open until after that solstice. And so right now we're working to push this farther into the season. So some of the polynyas that do appear to be missing here might just be opening later, but already this is indicating variability in the time that polynyas potentially open in this region from year to year. So in summary, in order to find these polynyas, we explicitly reward their detection at that ice shelf sea ice interface informed by their formation pathway. Doing this allows us to measure the polynya census from 2013 to 2023. In order to achieve this on such an underrepresented class, we had to build methods not just specifically in the algorithms, but also in the pre-processing, and I'd be happy to talk more about those too. I specifically want to thank my collaborators, Tasha Snow, Matt Siegfried, and Fernando Perez, and everyone here for having me today. Thank you.
Nice. Is it on? Okay, it was moving. Sorry. No,
Next, we'll have a presentation from Anne Grunow.
So hi, everybody. I'm going to tell you today about, I think, what is a unique and valuable resource for the cryosphere community, and that's the Polar Rock Repository. The repository was established in 2003 by the National Science Foundation as a way to preserve and make samples and data available to the community that were collected at enormous cost over many, many decades. Just very briefly about me, I've been at the repository since it started in 2003, but my prior experience was as a geologist, paleomagnetism, structural geology, argon dating, starting in 1983 in the Ellsworth-Whitmore Mountains region, and since that time, I had the opportunity to visit many, many regions in West Antarctica and the Transantarctic Mountains. So even if you don't have any samples and things you're interested in here, I'm kind of a knowledge base if you have a question about some geology. So the Polar Rock Repository, we have over 63,000 physical samples. Those include rock samples, unconsolidated deposits like tills and colluvium, dredge samples from around the entire Southern Ocean, Ross Sea, Weddell Sea, and terrestrial bedrock cores, including the DVDP, and most recently from Johnstone and the Pirate Hills. We also have a media archive that I started during over 7,600 images in there, and they span 65 years in time. So they provide a unique resource for looking at glacial surface conditions or logistics planning tool, or just seeing what the outcrops look like, because the Polar Geospatial Center satellite data is fabulous, but it just doesn't get down to that granular level of what the outcrop looks like. So a little bit about the physical sample collection. Most of the loans that we make now anymore are for reasons completely unrelated to why the rock was collected in the first place. And interestingly, a lot of the rocks have bits and pieces on them that are turning out to be of interest. Things like, first off, the subglacial precipitates found here in the elephant moraine have been used by the Santa Cruz group for talking about the East Antarctic ice sheet, and there's a lot of unusual samples in the elephant moraine. Things like weathering salts, they're clearly indicating water at some point, and people are starting to work on those as well. Olivine, obviously, and all the volcanics in many places, unique iron staining that people might start to do some studies on. We have marine invertebrates, coral, probably almost about 1,000 samples spread around the Southern Ocean and in the Ross Sea and Weddell Sea. Now, they're not fabulous necessarily or very big, but they're there on the dredge samples. And then lichen, and then we also have samples, which I'm sorry you can't really see this, but almost like a muddy slurry on the bottom of the rock, or on the edges of the rock, indicating again that water was moving at some point. It's leaving this bits of mud, and who knows what's in there, if there's any organics or little mites or something like that. And then also this also has lichen on as well. So not only do we have the physical samples, but a real treasure trove is the supporting metadata. So, we'll have people's annotated maps and air photos. We have incredible resource of people's field notes. And as probably you all know, if you collect data, you often record much more in your notes than ever gets published. But that information can be incredibly valuable. And then here, just a map from a field sketch from 1967 in the Dufek Massif, a place called the Davis Valley Fjordless Ridge, where they saw several algal ponds. They have carbonaceous clay layers. They're noting where they had snowy petrel observations, glacial geomorphic features. And the U.S. really hasn't been back there into this particular region probably since the 60s, looking in this particular valley. So there's a lot of information that we have as a resource for the community in addition to the physical specimens. Now, the media archive we continue to develop as well, because trying to make sure we get these images before people pass on, because a lot of the original researchers are in their 80s and 90s now. But we have images from places like the Patuxent Range where you can see these meltwater ponds that don't necessarily show up very well on the satellite data. And this one, I'm sorry, it's very difficult to see, but a 1966 observation from the Aztec Mountain in Beacon Heights of these beautiful vertical clay layers, basically like coming down the cliff face on top of Permo-Triassic rocks. Clearly not a Permian feature. Things like, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Striations on erratics here, Myers-Noatak. A place called Mount Beckert at the base of the Antarctic Peninsula. We have snowy petrel nesting sites where you can do these, I think, Mumio deposits, or I'm not sure how you pronounce it, where people are starting to carbon-14 date the deposits left by these snowy petrels. And at the same location, you have this beautiful waterfall that was developed, and there's just a lot of information in a very seldom visited spot. This, again, I see it's the base of the peninsula, really tough to get to. So, like the regular sample database, you would just zoom into the area that you're interested in. You can pull it up here as a thumbnail sheet, and then you can just click on each image and get the data. So I'm just going to show you very quickly how to use the database online, and hopefully I can make this work. Just 1 second. Okay, so if you wanted samples from us or data, and you can always just email me or Zoom with us, you would just go into Explore the Sample Collection or Explore the Media Collection. Now on the side here, we do have tutorials. We actually have some potential projects for students if you're in need of an idea for undergraduate or graduate student. At the moment, they're mostly igneous petrology, so may not pertain to this audience. But keep that in mind. We're hoping to add more as people offer to be mentors on those kind of projects. So we can explore the sample collection. Hopefully that's going to open. So 63,000 samples. You can zoom into the spot you're interested in. You could go over here and You could put the REMA layer on, you could put the USGS map on here. We go over to here to help you zero in on where you want to be. So I'm going to just you can go up to choose search options. So you go to add criteria, and since this is a cosmogenic community, a lot of you at least, we can go to additional material, and here are all the choices you could make if you're wanting to look for samples that have a thin section, or geochemical data in PET-DB. So let's just pick the ICE-D database. I'm going to add that. And then if you know a publication that was published on the cosmogenic data, you could type that in. So I'm just going to pick one I know. I'm sorry, I need to pick references. We can add that reference, Bibby, or you could put in the donor being Put Konen or Greg Balco or whoever it happened to be. We do that, and we can just perform our search. Or let's see, if you know you want the weight to be at least, let's say, 100 grams. So you can just keep narrowing things down so you don't end up with 1 million results. Perform our search, and there we have the results. That's in the Miller Range. That's in the Ong Valley. So we can expand the table here. You can just get some of the basic information. You can download this as a CSV file. That'll contain more data than just these fields. You could look at this as a thumb sheet, so you can see all the what the samples look like and what we have left. And let's say you really don't want anything that's already been, that is either sand or been crushed. So you could just click the little box here and say those are the samples that you want. You add it to your shopping cart, and you're done. Let's say that's good enough. You're done. You go to your shopping cart, take a look. Does that seem good? If not, you can say, okay, I don't want that one. Remove it. Then say, okay, I'm ready. That looks great. Let's check out. And it's just a simple form that we ask you to fill out. And am I near the end? Oh, I'm at the end. Okay, well, so just fill out the form. And at the bottom, it'll just send it to us. You'll tell me what you want, exactly how many grams you would like to have. Hit submit request, and you're done. And we'll fill out this, and we'll fill the request for you. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And up next, we have Tasha Snow talking about, sorry, please hold. Some new data from polar coastal margins.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you to the organizers for WAIS. This has been an awesome meeting, and thank you for having me. My name is Tasha Snow, and I'm a research scientist at ESSEC and NASA Goddard. And I'll be talking to you today a bit about SWOT, which is the NASA Surface Water and Ocean Topography mission, and really trying to demonstrate how this satellite mission can kind of change our understanding of the coastal regions around Antarctica. Before I get started, I want to recognize our funders, NASA and the SWOT science team, and collaborators on this project. So to kind of give you some background on SWOT, if you aren't familiar, SWOT is a joint mission between NASA and the French space agency CNES. It is a satellite that has a Ka-band radar interferometer on board that produces a complex interferogram and an amplitude image. It also has a nadir altimeter and a microwave radiometer. And with its two antennae on either side, it produces two swaths on either side of the satellite. Nominal spatial resolution is 10 meters at the center of the swath and grows towards the outside, and the swaths are about 50 kilometers across. The satellite, as I mentioned, measures nominally at 10-meter spatial resolution, which is called HR, the high resolution. But because of downlinking capabilities from the satellite, we are not able to bring that much data back down to back down to NASA. So the satellite processes the data on board, creating low resolution data to 250 meters in some locations around the Earth. And most of that is over the ocean. So the HR is for over the terrestrial water bodies, and the LR is over the oceans. So this satellite is meant to capture a global image of the surface topography of water every 21 days, but captures a lot more, especially in polar regions. And it is really exciting because it's the first satellite that creates a radar interferogram on board before sending it back down to Earth. It has been performing beyond expectations by far. It gets better than 1 centimeter vertical accuracy, and because of that, it is outperforming most calibration and validation methods out there, so it's been pretty hard to calibrate and validate this satellite, so beyond expectations. It's really been a game changer. So this is kind of what it looks like, capturing radar interferograms from over the ocean and over land. It's meant to provide a global inventory of water resources over small lakes and rivers. We used to be able to monitor about several thousand lakes, and now we can monitor near 1 million. It measures global storage change and river discharge on multiple different timescales, including sub-monthly, and it's meant to characterize mesoscale and sub-mesoscale features on the ocean, down to spatial resolutions of 15 kilometers, which is 10 times better than any previous sea level observing satellite. When it captures, one of the data products that you can, one of the variables you can get from SWOT is the sea surface height anomaly, which is shown here. These are a lot of eddies going across the Southern Ocean, and you can process that to calculate velocities, surface velocities of the ocean, and that's in the kind of lines that you see here moving around. And the color, you can start to fuse that data with you can start to fuse SWOT data with other data sets like temperature, sea surface temperature, like you see here, to better understand ocean circulation processes. And so this is kind of the resolution that we used to be able to get. Looking closer at one of these eddies, this is the velocity resolution. That's the highest quality we possibly could have gotten before SWOT, which is about 25 kilometers. Most of it is more like 100 kilometers that we were able to capture. And this is what it looks like now with SWOT. So you can imagine that as we're able to get these kind of velocities from the surface circulation, that this really changes our understanding of the physics of ocean circulation and what the features are across the globe. So this is kind of SWOT in a nutshell, and so let's take it to Antarctica, and I can show you what the possibilities are going to be there. So there's a few things to keep in mind in using SWOT in the polar regions. It only has coverage to 78 degrees north and south because of its orbit. As I mentioned, the HR coverage is only in certain areas around the world. That's in green here, and you'll notice that none of that is over Antarctica. So we only have low resolution data in Antarctica. There is one sea ice to get 3 months of data over sea ice right now. But we're working, I'm one of the leads for the SWOT Cryosphere Working Group. We just formed a few months ago with the new science team. This is the first time we've had cryosphere researchers on this satellite mission. And we have proposed an HR mask that looks like this, the dark blue over Antarctica, where we're going to try and get the higher resolution data. And what's exciting about this is not just the high resolution data, but the temporal coverage is really high. We can get near daily measurements in some places, and there's some days where you can get 2 measurements in a day. So this is really changing how we're going to be able to observe these surfaces. But you'll have to keep in mind that this is a new satellite mission. This was launched on December 16th, 2022, and the first public data came out only a year ago. And this was a mission that was not designed for the cryosphere and had no cryosphere scientists really on it. So it really is still very quirky data. On the left is an image of SWOT data over Pine Island Bay, and over the surface that it's intended to measure, designed to measure over the ocean surface and anything near the ocean surface. It takes really nice measurements, but you'll notice a bunch of artifacts and weird measurements taking over the ice shelves around the edges there, and it's different in every single orbit. Especially over the ice shelves, we still have a lot of challenges to resolve. On top of that, the level 2 low resolution sea surface height data wasn't really designed yet for coastal areas, so there's still a lot of work being done, especially on atmospheric corrections in that area. There are reset zones that SWOT has. The satellite has to turn off for 90 seconds every so often to kind of clear its downlinking capabilities. Matt's laughing here at the front. They have set these reset zones, of course, over Antarctica, and no one was there to instruct them where, so they are doing some of these reset zones over critical locations in Antarctica, and we're working to get those moved so that we can get data in those locations. There's other undocumented knowledge that hasn't been published yet, so if you want to know more about issues in the data, places where there's uncertainties, things like that, come talk to me. And I can also put you on our cryosphere working group. There is going to be a new version of the data being processed beginning in January, and a lot of these issues will be corrected because we've gotten them changed in the last few months. So starting in January, you'll start to see better data for the cryosphere. So with that, I'm going to start to show you some of the applications that we can start to use SWOT for. This is a MODIS image on the left, looking at the Cook Ice Shelf. It is showing landfast sea ice, and L1 and L2 represent leads, and there's some ISAT2 tracks over the top. On the right is SWOT Sigma Naught. That's the amplitude image that comes out of SWOT, and you can see a lot of the features in the sea ice, even in this low resolution data. And what's really interesting is we've also been comparing the surface heights to ISAT2 heights, and we find really good agreement between the two. One thing to keep in mind, though, is both in ISAT2 and in SWOT, you'll see a bit of a trend in this data. There are surface corrections that still need to be applied for the ocean that we haven't really gotten to yet, just with ISAT2. And because of the frequent repeat with SWOT, we're hoping to be able to back out some of these corrections to really get at the accurate surface heights. This is what SWOT looks like on top of a Landsat thermal image. What's exciting about SWOT is it's measuring the ocean circulation, or the ocean features, right? And we can back out circulation. Around most of Antarctica, we don't know what the surface circulation is at all, let alone what the variability is. Imagine what we can do now when we can get near daily observations of surface circulation. And this is pairing it with thermal data to show how those two kind of correspond and can tell us more about circulation. We can also pair it with PACE, which is the Phytoplankton Aerosol Cloud and Ocean Ecosystem satellite data. And this is a measure of chlorophyll A, looking at productivity. So putting that together with the surface circulation from SWOT that shows the bounds of an eddy, we can show how circulation impacts phytoplankton productivity. So some of this work has come out of the PACE Hack Week and ISAT2 Hack Weeks, but yeah, I want to thank everybody who's been involved in that, and please get in touch with me if you want to learn more about SWOT. Thank you.
Thanks, Tasha. So we're going to invite all of our speakers up to the front to start our discussion.
Yeah, just a quick question. How are you getting the velocities? Are you doing PIV, or are you calculating like the surface elevation and going from there?
Calculating the surface elevation.
Okay, so is it intensive to do that? No, it's quick?
I can show you.
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
Hi, great talk to everybody. I have a question for Ben about Antarctica. Does it include regional data sets, or do you prefer like Antarctica sheet-wide data sets?
Yeah, thank you. I think the overarching philosophy is for continental scale, but if there's something that is more regional that would be like important for context of the entire continent, I think that that could be very useful. So for instance, like in places where like meteors surface in like ablation zones, that might be regional, but it's really important for kind of like the broader context. So that's a data set that was new to the geology side. So yeah, it just depends a bit on what the specific data set is.
I also have a question for Ben. And you might not have a good answer for this, but what we saw from the other talks are like pretty exciting new things being developed all the time, right? Like people making great use of old data, people making great use of new data. But one of my frustrations with Quantarctica, is that right? Would Kenny be happy? One of my frustrations is that it gets stale really quickly, right? So what are the plans for kind of continuous integration, updating, like how do novel data sets get into there? Do they get into there? What's the future?
Yeah, you're saying in terms of that, like as there's more and more data that get produced, and it kind of gets out of hand in terms of how big the project would be, and it's hard to include everything. Is that what you're saying, or just like?
And at the same time, it's getting staler and staler, right? Like someone will produce a new velocity, or someone will start making 12-day velocities in Antarctica one day, hopefully, I hope. So both sides of that, there's an explosion of data, but also your curation is always retrospective, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's hard to expect this to be like a continuously updating project. I guess my philosophy on it is that it's a good place to start with things. And like I said during my talk, I really like it as a field planning tool. So yeah, the velocities might get a bit better, but they're not going to change like qualitatively if you're planning a field project. So if you're doing science, I would say maybe start with Quantarctica in terms of like making some decisions on which data sets to pursue, but then like grabbing the slightly newer and more improved data sets once you kind of get a big picture qualitative interpretation.
I have a question for all of the panelists and kind of related to Matt's question. How do you define good data? Like in a world where we're constantly producing data, is it all good? Do you keep everything? What do you filter? I know, Ellie, you have like standardized practices for this. Can you just comment on what you define as good data?
Sure. I maybe will caveat this that I am a statistician. So thinking about it from a statistics perspective, good data is data that represents the true underlying distribution. And I think that as we build new data sets, especially pushing into rare or relatively unknown objects, which is often what I think about, it is important to consider how the distributions within the data that we do have might not yet be accurate and push towards that accuracy.
I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle, from more of my cloud computing and open science background. I would say that, on top of, calibration and validation, everything we need to do with data in the QC, good data is data that is findable, is fair, right? Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. And that means that there is proper commenting, there's proper metadata. Our data, the data we produce is useless if no one else can use it. And we all thrive. Like, data is, on a is our base need as scientists. So if the data we produce is crap, we're making everyone else's science downstream crap. So that means that putting it into up-to-date data formats, especially now as people are transitioning into the cloud optimized data formats like GeoParquet, ZAR, cloud optimized point clouds, cloud optimized GeoTIFFs, these kinds of things are going to make your data super accessible and make everyone's life faster downstream, because you can actually access chunks of your data instead of the entire thing. And making sure that it's in a data repository where it's accessible without having, if it's something that you can access from Xarray without having to download it, then it's perfect. If you have to download it, then you're creating steps for people in the cloud and things. There are costs downstream from that. So as we move forward, thinking about these new data standards will make science so much better as we move forward and faster.
I also wanted to hear from Anne on that question, actually. I'm curious, do you keep everything? Are there samples that after a certain amount of time you think, this couldn't be useful, or do you keep everything?
So the minimum standard that we have is that we have to know where it's from.
Okay.
Just, if we don't know that, then it goes out into educational outreach. So we need to know that they don't have to give us a lot long, as long as they give us the place name or a field map and something like that. And then a general rock name. Usually that's the minimum, and knowing the collector and when it was collected. But beyond that, no, because as I say, a lot of the samples are being used for completely different reasons than why they were collected. So if somebody called it a granite, it really turns out to be a granodiorite, but all you care about is dating it or cosmogenic dating. That doesn't really matter if it's granite or granodiorite. So the samples are getting a lot of additional use than the original goal. So I don't feel that I'm in a position to make a statement about the quality of what was done before. I'm going to report to you exactly what the collector said, and if there's something that I feel is in addition, I'll put it in brackets so you know it's from me or from us, and then you have to make your own evaluation. So I don't feel like I'm in the standards industry in that regard. Things that don't have enough information, we don't catalog them. But we don't, even if somebody has a small collection to give us, they can be very valuable, even if it's only 20 specimens. So I don't want to discriminate against small collectors either. So.
I have a question for Ellie. So at the image resolution and size that you're feeding to the neural network, about how many images consist of the ice shelf coastline of the West Antarctic ice sheet? Do you deal with enough image data that this automated method is that it makes use of, instead of having to manually label all this data, I'm trying to get at is the amount of effort that is put into manually label and train this neural network. Is it provide enough support to the work that is put in?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think this trade-off is something really worth thinking about when we think about the trade-off between the human and the machine. I like to think of what we did in this project as a meeting of the human and the machine, but it still requires putting in both human time for the expert labeling and also machine time and figuring out how to incorporate these new optimizations. And at times, it works out that it will be more accurate to just manually label something and go that direction. In this particular case, and it's true, I think, in a lot of cases in Antarctica, but there are many experts in the room that really could speak to this better than I can. But speaking about our particular case, which we worked on for a while, because we really need to see this at every snapshot in time across every single year, So even though it might seem like there's just a few polynyas there, they're so small that scanning the image and finding them is a big time investment. And then to do this for every timestamp across an entire season, and hopefully eventually when we scale up to view this in other bands and therefore throughout an entire year, it ends up being quite a human intensive effort. And so we hand labeled 3 images, and that's just single snapshots in time and single snapshots in space. So a tiny fraction of that overall coastline, because images would need to be labeled that lack polynyas as well, because going in, we don't know that. And that effort to label those 3 images, it took a significant amount of time. 2 images were labeled across the summer when full-time was able to put into them, and then another image took a few months again after that. And so that quickly scales up.
And so do you have a automated way to select images along the ice shelf of to have a process for when images are collected at later times to be able to feed those in an automated way and get those labels or get the, be able to detect the polynyas in an automated sense, as time goes on?
Yeah, great question. So really, that's what we're aiming for this.
Yeah.
So right now we have it occurring through last austral summer season. And we're still in the middle of this current austral summer season, but hopefully when that data is fully collected and online, we will be able to feed that right in, which is wonderful. That is one of the great things about being able to automate like this, is that it also saves future time that hasn't happened yet.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for your question.
This might be more philosophical than anyone wants to talk about in a panel setting, but I think as a community, we often say that we're doing fair science, but we're actually really, really bad at the I part of that. I would be interested to hear your thoughts about what interoperable looks like functionally in the cryospheric research community, and how we can be better, because we just simply putting our data out there and making it open isn't being fair. It's especially not hitting on the interoperable part of fair, and I just want to know what you all are doing to make this more interoperable.
I'd say that as a standard, the way that I think about, succeeding in being interoperable is, again, my standard with Xarray. If you can open it with Xarray, you're getting to a place where you can be interoperable. And there's a lot more standards out there for that. I think one of the main, we are not taught how to produce data, right? And when I was talking with some people at the Arctic Data Center, they talked about, a metadata class that they hold. And I was like, we should have one of these classes you should teach a workshop at WAIS. How long do you need? An hour, 2 hours? And they were like, this class is 3 days long. And how many of us value data production enough to sit down in a class for 3 days to learn about metadata? Right, it matters, that's how long it takes, but none of us have been taught to value that. And so it does take a lot to get there. I think what the goal is with CryoCloud is to start to accumulate some of this knowledge of how to build data to be interoperable and what the standards could look like, especially for some of our larger data sets. With some of the data centers are not yet caught up to the experts in the crowd is one way that I would say at the moment, before we have best practices in place to be able to do that. But we're working on that, and yeah, having people open it with different kinds of tools and be able to access it programmatically, I think are some of the best ways to measure that.
Adding on to that, thinking about the pre-production of data, so the algorithms that might go into making higher level data products out of images or various things like that, I think modularity is a really important aspect of this, because sometimes when we build these pipelines, pieces of them are useful for other people's data production in order to achieve exactly what Tasha's talking about. So it does take more upfront time to make something modular, but downstream it is interoperable and more useful for more people.
I'm going to add on to that, that AI resources out there are actually great ways to make things more modular, to comment your data, to make it, to find out how to best produce the metadata for the data format that you want to use, how to decide on your data format, how to best chunk your data, things like that. Like I use ChatGPT for all of this. I use the paid version, but we can actually use this as a resource to cut down on the time to actually add these things into our workload so that we are taking normal.
So my question is a geology question, so I think that's Anne E. So can you tell us more about snowy petrel? And then can you elaborate on is doing anything? I know I saw an article 511 were just discovered in the area.
So on the snow petrel, that's just, that's not something that we have samples of those deposits. That was more to show that there are locations that may not be as well documented that where there are nesting sites where in the future when there's field programs, people could potentially go to those outcrops for sampling to expand the coverage of where they're getting those carbon-14 dates on those deposits. I'm afraid I don't know anything about the oil discovery. And our samples are all onshore for the most part, other than dredges.
Thank you, everybody, for really great talks. I also have a question for Anne. I'm just curious what records you feel like are missing from the Polar Rock Repository, any specific localities, and also how do you incentivize people to send in their samples so they're not left sitting in basements for decades? And how do you get folks to engage with a resource like this that is super valuable?
We try to encourage people who are retired are the most eager to donate samples. Getting active researchers to donate has been more challenging, but people like Greg Balco and Jaakko Pukkonen and Dan Morgan have been fantastic at this. But we offer to researchers to come and help them with packing up the samples, trying to pull their data together. But it is a labor of love for someone to do it. And let's see, the first part of your question was, where do we need samples? And,
what localities are...
Well, I mean, so because the Americans don't tend to visit the East Antarctic sector beyond the Transantarctic Mountains sort of line, that's where we have very few samples. Enderby Land, Wilkes Land, American Highlands, Pritz Bay, that whole sector, we have very few because not too many expeditions have been there. There's an American guy named Ed Grew who's been there quite a bit, but he said he's not going to send his samples. He's putting them in his will. So this is what I have to deal with. So, yeah, yeah, from 1977. Okay. So it's kind of a challenge to get people to give up their samples. In the marine community, the lake community, the samples go to designated facilities right at the get-go, and they have moratorium periods. But for people collecting geology samples, there's really no rules at all. They can just kind of keep them forever. NSF's encouraging them to be donated to or sent to a facility like ours at the end, but I'm not sure how the enforcement of that, it's relatively new.
Let's talk offline about that, because this is data, and these are data, and should go to a repository. So let's talk about that offline.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure the date on the most recent NSF OPP data management policy. It should include that.
Yeah, and I think it does in the more recent ones, yeah.
If you guys could all just take a minute and Google NSF OPP data management policy. OPP, Office of Public Programs, has a very specific data management plan requirement. And that is that you need to provide your data samples within 2 years of collection or the end of the award, whichever comes first, not second. And we need to see that language in your current data management plans when you submit a proposal. So make sure that when you're submitting a proposal, you are directly addressing that Dear Colleague letter and you're in adherence with that new policy. And when I say new policy, I think that Dear Colleague letter, if anybody's Googling, 2022, thank you very much. So it is relatively new, but it is probably one of the more strict policies inside NSF. So you tell me when you don't get those racks.
Yeah, that's great to hear, yes.
There was
thank you.
No, it's okay. There's a question in the back.
Oh, thank you, appreciate it. It's both a question and a statement. Isabel from USAP DC. I empathize, I apologize that we are not programmatically accessible at this current time. However, hopefully we will be able to be in the future. I was going to talk about this tomorrow, but we have rolled out a fairness assessment feature, which will be on everybody's data set pages, only visible for curators and authors. And it's pretty much a bare minimum fairness assessment. So if you do have opinions on what should be good or what should be okay or poor, for example, or just something that isn't in our list or that's assessed at all, please get in contact with us. That's all I have to say. And if you can't make it tomorrow and you're interested in fairness, come talk to me this afternoon. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, just to follow up to Anne, do other international programs have a similar repository, and what kind of communications and sharing exists between especially, you mentioned all the places where U.S. field programs rarely go and others do, and so they must have similar collections, and whether there are protocols within the other international programs.
Yeah, so I'm chairman of the expert group on geological heritage and geoconservation, and one of our tasks is to pull together an updated list of facilities in the SCAR community that make samples available. So it's actually pretty hard to get samples. It's not that they're not willing to share samples, it's just that they don't know what they have. They're not online. You'd have to contact the curator and they'd have to go and see if they had it in their collection. So things that would be unusual, like these surface coatings or lichen or something, they may not know what they have in their collection. The British Antarctic Survey did just launch an online site in May. It's tedious, but the data's there, and the Italians have an online site. Other than that, the Koreans, otherwise it's pretty hard to find. But they are willing, if you know what you're looking for and you know who to contact in those programs, you might have a chance.
No, encourage the community, even if something hasn't been cataloged, if you can find a paper that was published that references materials that are interesting to you, even if it's an old paper, if the authors are still around, track them down and do some digging yourself, and then get the samples to Anne when you're done.
All right, thank you all. And to bring this back to this theme of new tech and fair science, in one sentence or a few sentences, can each of you share what technology or resources you think are missing to make your fields and specific data usage, what are keeping it from being fair and open access?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm for the fair and open access, but I think that what I would love to be able to do is to try to make the samples more discoverable on more platforms, and then also try to include other data sets. I know that there are other repositories out there that may not be Antarctic per se, but But I think if we can all get on platforms that are more easily discoverable and actually usable in terms of requesting samples, and that's what I would love to see.
I will take more of a community building perspective. I think that one of the big things we're working on, we have in isolation, is collaboration. I cannot underscore how important community building and collaboration is in all of this, because as we do our work and build things and create tools and technologies and things like that, if we're having conversations and know that all of those things are out there and share those, then we will really eliminate, reinventing the wheel and redundancy, and save a lot of money in our communities, and save us all a lot of time and headaches. So I'd say that, intellectual generosity, collaboration, really bringing communication among our communities will really help a lot.
Yeah, I guess my answer is similar to Tasha's in terms of kind of support that people who are working on this type of thing need, both from the community as well as, I would say, in terms of funding. So these types of projects need people to work on them, and they would like to get paid. The Quantarctica project started as a little bit of SCAR money, and then now I think it's mainly funded by their Norwegian Polar Institute, but then CryoCloud is another good example that has been funded mostly by NASA, and just like kind of continuing, especially for these projects that keep going and are a community tool, continuing to kind of support the funding of those, I think, is important.
Yeah, thank you for this question, and I really do appreciate, I think, what I've heard from everyone up here. I would almost emphasize that with a use case. In our particular project, it's especially interdisciplinary. We're coming from different academic fields, and this collaboration actually allowed us, I think, to do something unique and achieve new results in both computer science and also geophysics at the same time. But in order to do this, I actually needed outside funding from a private foundation, because many times funding structures, as you rise through seniority, are dedicated in a specific field. And sometimes we need interdisciplinary academic fields. And so it's definitely something I've been considering this week, especially because of the great talks we had earlier from the funders. I think thinking about that. And one other additional thing that I would add here is reconsidering our publication structure. Some of these aspects, I think, that everyone up here is contributing don't necessarily land out in a neat first author publication that goes on a CV. And in a typical academic setting, that's really what's necessary, I think, to keep moving forward. And so I think, of course, publications are important, but perhaps also recognizing the value and the time that has gone into these other aspects of it, and also incentivizing that in that way.
All right, let's thank our speakers.